Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the latest Authors Guild Foundation webinar in our series From Manuscript to Marketplace. Today, we'll hear from author Carla Valenti about her middle grade novel Lotería, which released in September. And we're joined by Carla's agent, Amy Joan Paquette of the Erin Murphy Literary Agency, and senior editor Catherine Harrison from Kickoff Books for Young Readers. So From Manuscript to Marketplace offers case studies in the path to publication, touching on querying and submissions, the editorial process, marketing and publicity, all of that. Today's book, Lotería, is a fantastic work of adventure and magical realism. There are wonderful illustrations by Dana Sonmar embedded in the layout. A lot of great stuff going on with this book. And even if you don't write for children, I'm sure you'll find plenty to learn from today's discussion about the current publishing landscape. The series is funded in part by the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of Governor Kathy Hochul and the New York State Legislature. So thank you to all supporters of the Authors Guild Foundation, our charitable arm. And if you're not a member of the Authors Guild, please visit authorsguild.org to learn more about member benefits. As always, please keep in mind that today's panelists are here to generously offer their wisdom during the time we have. Please be courteous and respectful, and we ask that you don't contact the panelists afterward to submit a manuscript unsolicited. Please use the Q&A box below to submit your questions and chat with each other, and we'll get to as many questions as we can toward the end. So with that, let's welcome our guests. Carla Valenti. She was born and raised in Mexico City. She's put down roots in Japan, France, Germany, and most recently the Chicagoland area. She writes picture books and middle grade novels. Catherine Harrison, senior editor at Kickoff Books for Young Readers. She's worked there for over 10 years, editing picture books, middle grade and YA. She has a fantastic list that has included Lauren Castillo, Elizabeth Lim, Dave Eggers, Phoebe Wall, and many more. And also Amy Joan Paquette, senior agent at Erin Murphy, representing all types of children in YA literature. She's also an author. She wrote the novel The Train of Lost Things, picture books Mucky Truck, Ghost in the House, and The Tiptoe Guide to Tracking Fairies. Thank you, Catherine, Joan, and Carla for being here with us today, and I'll turn it over to you now, Carla.
Well, and first of all, thank you so much to the Authors Guild for hosting us. We are so delighted to be here. Thank you for everybody who is joining us today. We hope that this will be helpful and informative and fun, and please do ask questions. We love questions. So I'm going to go ahead and share a slide presentation that we have. Bear with me one moment. Oh. All right. So from Manuscript to Marketplace, my name is Carla Valenti. I am the author of the magical realist adventure Lotería that takes place in Mexico. And Joan and Catherine are the champion superheroes that help bring this book to life. I'm so excited to be here with them to talk to you about our journey. I'll start with a little brief intro about myself. I was born and raised in Mexico City and surrounded by magical realism. I'm including a picture of my house for two reasons. One, I want Catherine to see it because this is the setting for the next book that I am writing for you. Number two, I want all of you to look closely in the windows. And if you can look closely, you'll see there's a giant tree inside my house. My house was built around a tree. It's on a ravine, and the tree was just one of dozens of magical elements that my house had. And I'm not talking Harry Potter magic. We didn't fly. I wish we did. We didn't have wands, but there was so much magic and mystic life and fantasy in my house, in my life growing up. That is magical realism. Just to give you a couple examples, and this isn't an example of magic, but just really fun. My house had a slide inside it. So to go from one level to the next, you could take the boring steps, or you could slide down to my bedroom, which of course is what we always did. But we also had ghosts, and we had chaneques that are little spirits that take care of nature. And we would bury things in our backyard. We buried a pink stone, and diamonds came out of the ground where we buried it. My whole childhood was surrounded by these moments of just magic within the ordinary. I would go about my day and somebody would have a dream. My aunt had a dream about my grandmother after she passed away, telling her where my grandmother had hidden a pair of earrings that were for me. And nobody knew these earrings existed until my aunt had this dream. I mentioned this because magical realism is sort of hard to define, but by giving you these examples, these anecdotes, I'm hoping that this will clarify a little bit the difference between magical realism and fantasy. So the book Lotería is set in this magical realism genre where things are happening in the ordinary day-to-day life of a young girl called Clara as she walks around Oaxaca City. But because there's this aspect of magic to it, it elevates the story. It takes the story to a slightly different place. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The whole book actually started with a question. I have a background in philosophy, and for many years I had been exploring this concept of free will. Is there free will, or is everything in life predetermined? And I thought it would be a really great concept to explore for young readers. But how? How do you do this without writing this massive dissertation about free will? So I wanted to put this into a story, into a plot. I wrote Lotería to find the answer. So the first thing I needed were two equally versed and wise sparring partners. And here's a beautiful illustration by Dana Sanmar of life and death, and a good example of magical realism, because life and death are characters that walk around Oaxaca City just like everybody else. And people see them as life, and death looks like a beautiful woman. She doesn't look skeletal to them, but still she is death. And so I had life and death each take a position on the argument of free will versus determinism. Next, artwork by Dana Sanmar. Next, I had the game. So I had been thinking for a long time that a good way to position the story, to frame this concept, is through a game of chance. I initially thought about doing something like gaming, but I'm not a gamer, and I really felt that was not my area of expertise to dig deeply. And then my father came to visit, and he brought us a game set of Lotería, and you can see it here. It's very much like bingo. It's a game of chance where instead of numbers, you have cards. You have a deck, and the deck has images on it. When that card is flipped, it's very cool. Instead of calling out what it is, in this case, the skull and crossbones, there's a riddle in the back. And so the master, the game master, reads out the riddle, and the people who can guess the riddle look for it on their tabla. The first person to get 4 tokens in a row wins. This game of chance was a perfect setting to explore this question of free will, because there's this element of chance, of things just happening. And so what I did was I took this game of Lotería, and I got myself a vulnerable heroine, AKA very high stakes. So my character, this is Clara, would have to suffer the consequences of life and death playing the game, but also having this debate of free will versus fate. So for every card that life and death would flip, whatever that image was, it would unfold as an event in Clara's life, forcing her to make certain choices and hopefully leading the reader to ask themselves whether or not her choices were truly hers, or if they were inevitable based on everything that had been happening up until that point. At the same time, life and death are debating free will versus determinism. And for this, these weren't just my thoughts on it. I did a bunch of research going back decades, centuries, to find out what philosophers over time have been saying about free will versus fate, so that I could have two equally versed, equally wise sparring partners being honest in this debate. I didn't want it to be heavily weighed towards one or the other, but I really wanted to present the question fairly so that readers would ask themselves, do I really believe this? Do I believe this other thing? So to really push the readers to go there into this place of uncertainty and have the story lead them there. So true story, fun tidbit. When I started writing the book and I picked Clara as my main character, I wanted to base her on family members. And I soon realized that that was not a good idea, because in order for Clara's story to really go where it went, I would need her to suffer greatly and to go to really dark and difficult places. And I could not bring myself to do that with any of my family members. So I had to disconnect her from anybody that I knew and have her be her own self, her own personality, in order to be able to tell her story as authentically as I did in the end. And so the story unfolds. It takes place in Oaxaca City. Life and death come in on the hottest day of the year, and they're going to play their annual game of Lotería. They choose this pawn, Clara. If life wins the game, Clara will get a long life. If death wins the game, Clara will be sent to death's domain. And as the game unfolds, every card is an event in Clara's life, forcing readers to think about whether this is free will or if it's really fated. The debate, as I mentioned, also unfolds during this time. And here's a fun little graphic to show you the different positions of the two characters. So throughout it all, life has all of these arguments. People can make choices without being influenced by their past events. And for every one of those arguments, death has a very strong counter argument. And ironically, what ended up happening is that I wrote myself into a conundrum as I continued to move the story forward. I ended up getting to a climax where I actually wasn't sure what the answer was to this question of free will. And I found myself in a position where I had argued both positions equally well, and I was sort of stuck. And this also coincided with the climax that I had planned for Clara. And a great twist of irony, and I was telling Catherine this when we first started talking about the book. Initially, I was pretty sure how I wanted the story to go. I, of course, am the creator of Clara, so I had this fate for her in my mind. And when I got to this point and I was stuck, the only way that I could actually make progress was by giving Clara free will. And I had to take a step back as the author and just let her tell the story as she thought it should be told. And I'm glad I did, because it actually ended up being a much better story than I expected. Here's a fun little tip that I use for anybody who might suffer from writer's block like I did. As the story progressed, if I would get stuck along the way, I would flip a card from the deck and then force myself to write the next scene using whatever the card was that came up. And some of my best scenes that I'm proudest of that really turned the story in directions that I had never anticipated came up exactly that way, including the big baddie at the end that I had not planned on him being there. He's this king that steals children so that he can take the remaining years of their lives and be immortal. And this is very much like the portrait of Dorian Gray, inspired on that. But this king didn't come up until I was almost at the end of my first draft. And I was trying to figure out how to make progress. I flipped the card and I got the crown. And all of a sudden, this king appeared in my mind. And I thought, how am I going to fit this king into the story? And as soon as I found a role for him, I obviously then had to go back and fill in all of the stuff, that led up to that point. But it just goes to show how sometimes the story can go in a completely different direction, a much better direction, if you just lend yourself to fate, to the turn of a card. Yep, give me free will. So I wrote my first draft. I wrote my second draft, building in the king. I wrote my third, fourth, fifth, many, many, many drafts later. We do what we do. We revise and rewrite. We send it to our critique partners, and I think at least one of them is here, and she was amazing, and I'm going to tell you why in just a minute. You revise, you rewrite, you send it to your agent, and at that point, I had a different agent that was not Joan, and my agent did not like Lotería. And that happens, and it's okay, and it's a very subjective industry, and I was devastated because I had spent so much time writing. At this point, I'd been writing for about 10 years, and I had a few bites, some champagne rejections, very disappointing for me, my career. I got to this point, I'd written this novel and she didn't like it. And I thought, well, that's it. I gave it my best. It's time to step away from this whole world of publishing. And my critique partner had the book, and I sort of shared with her the disappointment that I had. And she immediately came back and she said, nope, I am not letting you walk away from this one. You need to use this manuscript to find another agent. This is the manuscript. This is the story. It needs to be told. Thank God for critique partners who believe in you when you don't believe in yourself, because that's what I did. My agent and I had a great talk. We decided that we were no longer the best business partners to move forward, so we parted amicably. And I used this opportunity to look for a new agent. I had been after Joan for many years, and so this was a great way for me to actually reach out to her and pitch her a new story, which I did. And here's my email that I sent Joan. So I think it's good to share here because we don't always see the kinds of emails that get sent out and the kinds of things that we share. So what I wanted Joan to know was a little bit about me, but I didn't want to just tell her I'm from Mexico and this is what I wrote. I wanted to show her what had inspired me to write this book. So I led with the actual genesis of the story, my father coming with this game and how that inspired me to write what ended up being Lotería, and then concluding with a little brief bio about myself and where I've been, and a little summary of some of the stuff that I had. So I sent this out to a number of agents that I had been interested in. It ended up resulting in 4 offers, but agent number 1, always my favorite, was Joan. And the day I got her email, I was in the car waiting for my kids to come out of a little 7-Eleven with their father, and I opened up my email. By the time they came in, I was sobbing hysterically. They had no idea what had happened, but that was Joan saying she loved the book and she wanted to talk to me. So the rest from here, I will lead on to Joan because I think this is where she needs to tell you what happened next.
Yes, well, let me tell you, receiving that query was something else. I almost feel bad sharing the timeline. I was looking up the, with regards to my typical time frame. So I've been an agent for a while, I guess, I don't know, 12 or 13 years now. Obviously, in the beginning, you have a brand new list, you have all the time in the world to read queries. Needless to say, when I get queries now, I'm not very prompt typically, just out of other commitments. I like to read things in order, roughly. So something that comes in first, I'm going to go down the line, and typically, it'll take me a while to get back to it. But of course, when something comes in, you just sort of glance through it quickly, file it, and then I get back to it when I can give it some time and space. And I received this query and, gave it the quick read, and I was like, this is amazing. I had pasted out the query, and I'm going to read you the opening paragraph in case you didn't quite get it in there. But this is the opener, dear Joan. This story arrived in my father's suitcase, the words unfolding before me as he showed my children the cardboard tablets and deck of cards that make up the bingo-like game of La Lotería. As my father set out the game and gathered a pile of frijoles to use as counters, the heroine of this story made her appearance. And then she goes into the synopsis and all the other useful information. But how can you resist an opening like that? Like it immediately pulls you into the voice of the story, and yet it's conveying information like this is a family story, this is a personal story. I also have sort of showcasing this writing voice. And so immediately I got the query on March 5th, and I replied on March 7th. And I think maybe, okay, yes, I got the full manuscript, right? So normally it would just come as a query, but in this case, it was a referral through an existing client. So I got the manuscript. So I wrote back on the 7th, having read the whole book. So that was, needless to say, again, this is why I'm like, should I say this? Like, this is not my usual time frame. Even when I was, day 1 of being agent, that probably wasn't well, maybe, but in any case, I was completely captivated. And I wrote back this gushing email. It's just like the moment I read it, I was like, this is a powerful story. This is a story that it feels essential. It's the combination of this incredibly rich storytelling voice, which for me as an agent is always what pulls me in first. Just that fluency and richness, and this classic, you could see it in a published book. You're like, I could be in a bookstore picking up page 1, and that's really what I'm looking for. And then beyond that, there was just this riveting story that was just a page turner, and these sort of deep life questions, which I love and always look for in my submissions. Is, I want things to happen. I have to have a plot, I have to have action, I have to have tension, but I also want to be moved and challenged, and I want to look at life in a slightly different way. When I finish reading, I want to be thinking about things. It's not like every book is going to be philosophy or every book is going to, sort of what is the universe, but there should be something that you take away, that when you turn the page, you maybe look at the world a little differently, or you look yourself a little differently, or someone else. And then this book just had all of those things. So I think we talked on somewhere around the 10th, and I offered a presentation immediately. So I think within like a week or 10 days from that first contact, we had made it official, and it was just this perfect perfect storm connection that I just have been so delighted to work with Carla since then. And just, and she has so many other good things, brewing, and that we've sold and that are coming, and it's just all the great things. So it was, yeah.
Well, and one thing I wanted to mention too, and I think this is one of the benefits of having been with other agents, is that you sort of get to see how different agents work. And I remember when you and I were talking about your specific, how you represent your clients, one of the things that I really appreciated is that you are an editorial agent. So you will read the work and you will provide feedback and commentary and guidance, but also I liked how you framed it, and I forgot the words you said, but the idea was I will be your champion in whatever way you need me to be. So if you need me to go through and do line edits, I will do that. If you just need me to brainstorm, I will do that. If you need me to walk you off a ledge, I will do that. And you have done all of those things for me, right? So it could be, Joan, I'm losing it. I don't know where to go from here. And so we set up a time and we talk for an hour, and I say, these are the 7 ideas I'm exploring. And then you help me walk through which of these are viable, from a heart standpoint, which of these are marketable, which of these sound very much like something else. Maybe this one is a good to pair with an illustrator. Maybe this one should not be a verse novel, right? And that I think it's a very unique thing. Not everybody wants or needs that, but I find that makes the partnership that much stronger, right? It really is a business relationship where I'm partnering with you, and together we're creating something that we can then send to Catherine, right? And so there are different ways to be that kind of agent. So yeah, that is one thing that I remember we talked about. I'd love to have you share the process, because you did read it, you did have comments, I revised it, we wrapped it up, we got it to a point where we both felt really happy with where it was, and then you put together a list.
Yes. So that's, I was going to say that's the exciting part. There's every step is exciting.
It's all exciting.
It's such a fun, it's such a thrill of, hope and excitement and possibility. So yes, so Carla did revisions, got it all ready to go. And then I make the list. And so when I'm, preparing this part of the submission process, it's all about thinking, it's very thoughtful in sending it out. I'm not just trying to sort of blanket publishing, but I'm really thinking like, okay, who at each publisher feels like the right connection? What kind of a story is this? Is it is it middle grade YA? Is it, some people like action, some people like fantasy, different kinds of things. So, I come up with a list, and I think I had 15 editors in this case, across all the publishers, and you kind of balance it all out. We sent it out. And I think I usually I just do like submission header, but I think I was so carried away. I think my header was something like, if you only read one email today, make sure it's this one. I'm like, this is going to be a showstopper. Like, read this. I'm like, this is what it did to me when I opened my email. I want you to have that same joy. And so again, this is not necessarily, the time frame is not necessarily representative of everything. And I've, sold many other books, and many other books even that went to auction, which didn't have an immediate response. And I should backtrack with, for those of you querying agents, I've fallen in love with and signed authors who I took a year to read their work. So, it's not that if you don't get that in your agent or submitting relationship, just because it doesn't sell in a week doesn't mean it's not going to happen. But that said, this one did. So, we went out on May 6th, and, 15 editors. And I think I got an initial response just within just a few days saying, this is so wonderful. I have to send it to more people. And then we ended up getting multiple readers, go back out to everybody and say, hey, this is, someone else has made an offer. And then it ended up going to auction. And Catherine was the one who and the others are, it's so hard, of course, when you're in this case, because there's, you have passion from all directions, but there was just something about that connection that I'll let Catherine give the details there, but as soon as we sort of heard her pitch, and Carla got to talk with the different people who were interested, and I think there was just that connection right away, that it just felt like you just know when you have that right champion, someone who's going to who gets it, and who's like, I'm going to help you to take it to that next level, to bring out all the things, and also to be a champion in-house, because publishing is a big world, and Penguin Random House is a big world, and books can get lost, but this is not a book that was going to get lost, and so we were like, okay, this is the person who can really make it stand out, and she has. So.
Well, and I will say one thing too, again, about the business of being an agent, or working the author-agent relationship. During the auction process, I found it so helpful the way, so you and I talked a lot, and we talked about the pros and cons of different publishers, and the pros and cons of one book versus two books, or the pros and cons of a big publisher versus a smaller one, and just specifics about editors, and specifics about what questions to ask when I'm talking to the editors. So that cannot be understated, right? I think as an author, when we're looking for an agent, it isn't just somebody who knows the market and is going to go out and place your book. It's somebody who knows you, who knows the editors, who knows what they like. As you said, you're not just casting a wide net to everybody. You're being very deliberate and precise in who you reach out to and why. And then conversely, very honest with me about, this, think about this, think about this, think about this, think about this. And that is so helpful from a business standpoint, right? As I'm building my career as an author, to be able to have that inside knowledge that you were able to bring to the table.
Yeah, agreed.
So Catherine, we're on to you.
Yes, my mic is working still, right?
Yeah.
It had some issues earlier. Okay, great. Yeah, Joan and Carla, it's been so fascinating to hear about what happened before I even saw the manuscript. Some of this is news to me, and it's exciting. And I want you to name names about that previous agent who was so clearly wrong-headed that I wouldn't ask that of you.
No, she was lovely, and it just wasn't the right. Yeah. It is so subjective, right? I mean, we have editors who didn't like Lotería, and so that's just the way that's just the way the business is.
Well, there's very
grateful to her.
Yeah.
Gonna buy her an ice cream.
Well, I would say, I guess the journey for me started with Joan. I think we'd had a scheduled call right around this time. So you were extra on my radar as someone whose taste I just admired for a long time. And we'd never connected on a project before, but it was in my head. And like you were saying, I mean, response time is a perpetual stumbling block for editors as well as agents. So there are a lot of factors that go into like what you get to first, like what rises to the top, because, on average, I mean, I don't know what the average is, but I would say I get multiple submissions a day. It really piles up, and it never stops. So, you have to have some method of sifting through and zeroing in on the things that might really strike a chord. And so for me, just receiving the submission from Joan was an indicator that, look, okay, Joan has excellent taste. I trust her taste. I heard her pitch, and I know I want to start reading this one. And then as soon as I dipped into Carla's beautiful first page, excellent. It's just a wonderful, evocative scene that opens the book. I was completely hooked. And I think there are a lot of different factors that came together in this book. I mean, I feel like it's kind of that lightning in a bottle where it's like every element is there in perfect balance. There are commercial hooks to this book, as well as, real, like backed up by real literary quality. There are big ideas. There are relatable characters. It really has so much, and it feels fresh. It doesn't feel like it really doesn't feel derivative of anything else I can think of.
Agreed.
And I think the originality, but accessibility of the idea was something that instantly resonated with me. But the biggest factor with this, and honestly with any submission, is it's always voice, it's always storytelling. There are some authors who, like, the minute you start reading their work, you know that you're in the hands of a really gifted storyteller, and you want to follow them wherever they're going to take you. And I feel that way about people like Philip Pullman, I think, is an excellent example, because, and his stories take some pretty wild twists and turns, but you know that there is this steady narrative hand guiding the ship, and you know that wherever it takes you will feel satisfying and good. So yeah, I think that the way Carla writes really struck a chord. I've long been a fan of Latin American magical realism. It was actually, I minored in college in Latin American literature. Although these days, because I work only on children's books, I don't tend to have a lot of time to read adult books anymore. I mean, I do, but you know, it's like, you know, stuffed in around the edges of my workload of reading. But I instantly felt in those first few pages, like just the atmosphere and the tone took me back to people like Marquez. And I felt like I was somewhere that I recognized, but hadn't been in quite some time. So that was really exciting. And so from there, I'm sorry, I sort of took notes, but they're like pretty garbage. From there, I would say that, you know, it was pretty clear. I pretty quickly shared the manuscript with others in my group. The way it works at my imprint, we don't have formal acquisition boards like some publishers do, but everything we acquire has to go through two levels of managers. There's an editorial director and a publisher, and we often solicit reads from others on the team, people from marketing and publicity and sub-rights who can offer a little more insight, especially when there's the sense that an auction may be coming, or we think it's something that we might offer like bigger money for. When you get to that point, it's just more voices have to be in the room. And then when you get to the point of like, you know, major, you know, whatever, significant deals or whatever they call it on Publishers Marketplace, at that point, then you need everyone in the company, like from the president to the head of sales, turning their key. And so in this case, I instantly shared it with my editorial director and a few other colleagues, because while that's not an official part of the approval process, we work really collaboratively and really value the opinions of our coworkers. So, you know, my boss immediately liked it. And so things were moving quickly on my end, but they were probably moving even quicker on Joan's, because there was lots of other interest coming in. And then that just speeds up the process like threefold. So we were so anxious going into the auction, because we wanted it really bad for our list. I mean, it just felt like for us, like for what we look for at Kickoff Children's, I would say, is books that feel timeless over books that feel timely. Although timely is good too, but what we're really looking for is books that will stand the test of time, books that you know, will be appreciated by librarians and reviewers, and will wind up on state award, you know, all kinds of things. But we want books that feel like they have the strength to endure. And so we just felt like it was a perfect addition to our list. And yeah, so we went into the auction. I don't know if there's anything else relevant to share about it from that end. I mean, I did have a call with Carla beforehand, which was wonderful. You know, Carla, I think you're your own best advocate. You know, even just like having to speak after you on a panel, it's like pretty intimidating. You're such an engaging speaker.
Oh my gosh. Stop. But I am going to interrupt you, because I wanted to say something, and I find this very helpful from, I mean, I'm so new to this. And so the newbie author, this is just such a mysterious world, what happens behind the scenes. So for instance, on an auction, it isn't just about money, right? It isn't, and I remember, Joan, you and I talked a lot about this, that it isn't that necessarily people are just throwing money at you. It's a whole package, it's a conversation. So I spoke with Catherine, I spoke with the other publishers and the editors, and we talked about, what is your vision for this book, right? What changes do you envision? How do you think we're going to work together? What is your editorial process? And that's part of the decision that one makes on an auction. There's also a discussion about, like, what kind of marketing support are you going to get? Or is this going to be part of, a leading book in our catalog, or maybe not, right? And so all of those things then become part of the conversation. So when you're actually, when you hear auction, it seems like, oh, first, the paddles and people just like bidding, but it's more, and that's to Joan's point earlier, that's what makes it so hard, beautiful, but hard, right? Like, I was delighted at the end of the auction. It was exhausting. It was such a stressful day, but it was stressful because everybody was so wonderful and enthusiastic, and it was a tough decision because there was no, clear front runner that you can just say, well, it's, this is an offer I can't refuse. And I think in the end, you were, I think, the first one to really express an interest. And I think the conversation you and I had from the very beginning, the ideas that you had really resonated with me, right? And you wanted to weave, for instance, and I love this. So initially in the first draft that I wrote, life and death are influencing Clara's life, but Clara is not having any impact on life and death. And so you proposed, what if we just intertwine those narratives so that she is actually also playing a role in affecting their lives? And what does that then mean for how things unfold in her life, right? So there's this like very interconnected relationship. And I loved that you went there, because it showed that you were not just looking at this as a plot-based adventure story, but there was this philosophical conversation that you were committed to, and you were going to help me get it to where it needed to go. So I just wanted to put that in there. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I do feel like, I think different editors have different feelings on this, but I do feel it's pretty important to make clear your editorial vision before getting into anything, because and there's an incentive not to when you're in an auction, right? Like, it's easier for an author to go with the person who says it's perfect as is. We'll just slap a cover on it. But I think that for me, I want to be very intentional and clear about what I'm communicating to you, and make sure that we see it the same way, so we don't wind up coming at it from different ends down the road. But what you brought up about interconnectivity, that was a big thing for me, and something I think you really addressed beautifully throughout the book, because it's interesting to hear you talk about your process where you just sort of turned over cards at times to influence what would come next. Because I would say that in the initial draft, there was a little bit of a sense of that episodicness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This doesn't seem like the right word, but yeah, it felt a little episodic. And there were places where you were sort of, an image or something from one of the cards would weave its way into the story throughout, or it had a longer through line. And those moments were so satisfying. So I think that one of my big notes to you was finding more places to do that.
Yeah.
More way. It's even just like in a conversation with a friend, when someone references the joke that came up 5 minutes ago, it's twice as funny.
Right.
So that was a really rewarding part of it. You were about to say something a minute ago.
Well, I had two things. One was, one of the things that I found most helpful, and this actually speaks to the importance, I think, of having that initial conversation with you, because it really helped me see that we would be partners in sort of thinking about how best to frame this, right? But you'll recall that in the first draft, I went really in the weeds on a lot of the philosophy. And so it really helped that I knew that you wanted the philosophical part of it, which other editors were less enchanted with. But I knew, because we had that initial conversation, that mattered to you. And so then I was willing to trust that you would help me trim what needed to be trimmed and say what needed to be said, because you also wanted that to be part of the story. So that was really important. And I guess one reason why those conversations do matter, it is part of being authentic and true to the story. But then the second thing I wanted to have you talk about was the ending. and how you initially felt about it, and then how we sort of came up with, without spoilers, without giving anything away, because we want our friends to buy the book and read it. But I think the ending mattered to every single person that I talked to, and different people had different approaches, and different people wanted me to handle it in a slightly varied way. So anyway, I'll let you take that and say what you want.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I'm like, how do I talk about this in a way that doesn't include spoilers? In the, I'd say in the initial draft, there's something very tragic that happens at the end. And my initial gut reaction was, oh, I wish this tragic thing didn't happen. Carla, would you be open to? But, you know, I always felt like a little hesitation around it because it's such a big part of the story. And I don't really think it's my place to assign what the ending should be. But I did want to.
We had talked about that too, it's sort of in that debate. So it's interesting that it's sort of an evolving conversation. Sorry, not to cut you off.
Yeah, but so my goal, I guess, was to open up a dialogue with you about how we could bring more hope into the ending, how we could lighten it, how we could stay true to the tragic part of it, in a way that gives readers some hope. I'm looking at Pandora's box with the little, hope at the bottom. And one thing that was really instructive to me was hearing you talk about it, because I think we were both bringing our own cultural lens to the question. And oh God, is this getting spoilery?
Well, I'll say that what I think, and I like that you brought up the cultural lens, because I think that is how we resolved it, right? That in the end, this isn't just a story that takes place in Mexico and features a Mexican character. It's a story that's very embedded in Mexican storytelling themes and ideas, right? So it's not just the content, but the structure, the way we tell stories. And so I wanted to be true to that part of it as well. And I didn't want it to fall into the tropes or narrative style of US storytelling, but rather to keep it seated in Mexican storytelling, which, other cultures, not just Mexico, but other cultures, we embrace tragedy in different ways, and we explore dark issues in different ways. And so that was very central to what I wanted of the story. And with every editor with whom I spoke, that was something I was going to hold on to regardless, right? So for sure, if an editor was like, no, I can't live with this, then that was a clear non sequitur for us.
Yeah. And I think like the fact that life and death are both characters, and you know that from the beginning, seeds the possibility of how things could go.
Yeah.
And makes clear that it's not the end of the world, that there is
tragedy. Yeah.
And I think it's important to have those kind of books that maybe a different kind of happily ever after, just because hard things happen in kids' lives, and we have to be honest and kind of honor that in our books too. I just wanted to say one thing really quick to what you were saying earlier, Catherine, about how the idea of, as an editor, giving your vision, and some authors sort of, preferring the easier path. I would say that, I would encourage any authors who are watching this to really, I think it's immensely valuable and essential to lean into that instructive. I feel like, and Carla is such a perfect example of this, that as the kind of author who wants to improve, who's like, okay, well, here I have a choice of someone who thinks it's perfect and someone who thinks, not that you're just going to sort of willy-nilly, tear it up, but I feel like there's always room to improve. And so, an editor who is providing insight, and, you want to have that discussion to say, okay, well, what exactly, and be sure the visions are compatible. But if someone's going to help you take it to the next level, to me, that would always be superior to someone who's like, yes, it's perfect, because, I think we all know there's always room to grow. So that's, it's just sort of, it's a good reminder to, the easy path isn't always like the preferred path. And I think that's one thing that I love about you, Carla, is that you're always looking for ways to, how can we make this better? How can we take it to that next level? And it really shows in the quality of the finished product.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to circle back to something you brought up earlier, Joan, too. I would love to hear how the two of you, like, once the book is in Catherine's hands, does the agent just walk away? You're done. Good, good luck, good job. See you guys later. Or how does that relationship continue between the agent and the editor?
As far as that particular book, or in general?
Or just in general?
I think it depends. Certainly over the life of this book, there's a lot of interaction in the sense of, oh, here's the cover, or, I might be copied on some of the copy editing emails, or, I'm in the conversation. I'm definitely less active once the editor-author relationship takes place, because, I feel like I've made that connection, and I don't see it as my place to be sort of putting my finger in the pies while they're being cooked or whatever, but also being there to be your advocate, or to be, again, as you mentioned earlier, I feel like it's a little different with every book, a little different with every editor author. And I'm sort of like, whatever capacity I'm needed and most useful, that's kind of what I'm looking to do. So that's, the book sort of relationship. And then separately, I feel like, again, it's different for each editor, but, I like to keep in touch with editors that I work with. So, we'll email, I'm always sending a new submission, so that, they're not going to go long without hearing from me, or, checking and touching base. Catherine is also an author herself, and I actually represent Catherine. So we have cause to we have all these webs of intersection here. So that's yet another sort of overlap, but yeah. And, when we are not in the midst of pandemics, I go to New York and or Oregon, and have not yet meetings with editors in person sometimes. And so there is that sort of cultivating of a relationship, because again, we talked about the submission process earlier, where I want to be current to, I actually wasn't aware that Catherine had a background in Latin American literature, but if I had been, I would have been doubly like, oh, this is perfect for her. So those are the kinds of things where if I'm, or so-and-so loves funny books, or so-and-so loves like twists at the end, or, that is the kind of thing I'm thinking about when I'm putting together my submission list. So the more I have that interaction, or just keeping in touch, it helps me to be thoughtful and deliberate in when I eventually send out the submissions.
Yeah, I would say on average, agents tend to be more involved when you hit a snag in the process, which luckily was I don't feel like we hit too many rough patches on this one. I mean, we could, one, I'll volunteer one, which is that when we hired a freelance copy editor who, we had made the conscious decision to put all the Spanish phrases in Roman text versus italic, because it's more like treating the languages as though they are both valid and on the same level, rather than sort of othering one. And the copy editor conveniently changed it all back to italics. That felt like a moment, but yeah, I don't know. I was gonna I have more process I could talk about, but I want to leave time for questions. So,
well, and I see Johnny, which probably means we're gonna do Q&A, but I don't want us to leave without a little bit on Dana Sanmar, who is a brilliant genius illustrator. I had hoped that Catherine could talk a little bit about bringing an illustrator on board. So maybe if we still have a few minutes, I'll let you just talk about how Dana was involved, and then I'll show everyone an awesome video that she sent us of how she built the cover of Lotería, because Lotería, the cover, which is gorgeous, was not drawn digitally or even on paper. She assembled it, and it's a technique called papel picado, which is very much her style, but also very representative of Mexico, right? With the papel picado strips, the colorful paper. So it was a perfect wedding of ideas and concepts, and just from an artistic standpoint, I could not have been more delighted with somebody to illustrate it. And the other thing I'll point out is just her vision that she captures in the cover, with the blue and the chaos all flowing in the background, and just it seems so fate and chance. And then she's got Clara standing tall and strong, holding a card in her hand, which just embodies free will and choice. And so those two themes, which are the themes of the book, she did such a brilliant job of capturing it in one illustration. So I will show that video, and you can tell everybody how she came on board.
Yeah. One other little behind the scenes thing. when we are figuring out an illustrator for the cover, like for illustrated novel, picture books have a totally different process, but for an illustrated novel, we have a cover kickoff meeting in-house, which is just editorial and design and maybe the publisher, you know, giving sort of like a pre-launch type presentation, just summing up what the book is about, what they love about it, whether there are any visions for what it could look like. And this story, it's so visually rich. There's so many images to pull from. I think it immediately got all the designers excited, and like 5 different designers requested to work on it. So we had an embarrassment of riches in that a bunch of different designers sent in illustrator ideas. And I think we had something like a dozen options to choose from, maybe even more in the beginning. So I sent Carla this like absolutely overwhelming PDF full of portfolios to consider, but Dana really stood out, I think partly because of that papel picado process. And she's also, her interior illustrations are also very strong, her black and white work. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. And I believe this was her first children's book too. So that's always exciting to kind of get in on the ground floor with someone. And so did you already show, is the video like,
I ran it. I don't know.
You ran over. Yeah, that was it. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure. But one thing that was really cool about the cover design process for this book is that there are so many wonderful images that literally take place in the story. Like it's like a spider chasing Clara, or you know, there's this wonderful sort of palace with like platforms and pillars interspersed with jungle growth that's so amazing. We struggled to settle upon the image that was representative of the story as a whole, because it would have been very easy to do a cover that just literally depicted an action scene. And in the end, what we realized is that even with that wealth of imagery, it made way more sense to do something that was like a figurative cover, that like there is not literally a scene where Clara is standing in a swirl of wind and you know, grasping for cards. But it really captures the sort of the totality of the story. And then you see some of those specific images like the spiders creeping in. I'm going to cut myself off because I'm good.
We could talk for hours about the artwork, and we've had other sessions where we just go on and on talking about the artwork. So Johnny, you can have us back to talk about Dana's artwork anytime.
That's wonderful. Yeah, so we do have a lot of questions. First of all, some people wanted a little clarity on how Carla and Joan got together, what attracted you to each other, and what were those steps exactly?
So I'll talk about my side of things and how I stalked Joan for many years. But so, you know, as a growing author, you do your research, you talk to people. There are tons of lists out there about top agents. You go on Publishers Weekly and you just see, you know, who's doing what. You read the books you love and you find out who represents them. And in Joan's case, she was closed generally to submissions. But as I grew as an author and developed my own network and had critique partners and had other author friends and developed a body of work, I was able to submit to agent through a referral through one of her clients. And the first time I reached out to agent Joan, she did not like what I sent her. So I was devastated, but that's how life is. And so I went back to the drawing board and I kept writing and writing and writing and working. And then when I wrote Lotería, I had another opportunity to reach out, and I did. And this time it worked. So it was just sort of good luck, lots of hard work, being, you know, doing the work of networking and building up your own connections and becoming a part of the industry. And by then I had published a couple picture books with Sourcebook, my super science heroes. And so I actually had a little bit of legitimacy as well to say, hey, you know, I've done my work. I've been, you know, I know what I'm doing a little bit. And so I felt like I was in a much better position at that point to reach out to Joan. And ironically, the story that I initially sent to Joan was eventually purchased by Catherine, Esperanza Caramelo. And so that story took a long journey, but ended up in the right hands with Joan and then ended up in the right hands with Catherine.
Yeah. I think that speaks very much to, sorry, I don't want to cut off other questions, but that speaks very much to I think the most important thing that you can do as an author is to just keep growing and keep developing. Like I feel like I sometimes see situations where, you know, an author gets rejected on something and they'll just keep sending that one thing. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with perseverance and with revision and all the things, but also you're growing as a writer. You're a stronger writer than you are now than you were a year ago. Keep writing, keep creating something new, because all of that distillation comes out in your new work. And sometimes that is what it takes to get you to that next level. And then you may find, you know, homes and paths for the previous things, but continuing to invest in and develop your craft and to kind of keep putting your feelers out there. I think that's an essential part of really going the distance.
People are curious about the auction process. So who is there? Is the author there? Is the agent there?
It's a virtual auction. So it's really conducted usually by email. I'm sure it used to be different in various incarnations of technology, but these days, really what it means is a certain number of people have said, yes, I either have made an offer or I want to make an offer, or there's enough people interested that the ones who are still reading, I say, okay, I have offers coming. And so I'll say, okay, by this date, this time, please get your offers in. And so they'll say, okay, I want to offer for one book or for two books and this advance and these terms. And so it's, I guess the equivalent of a paddle in some respects, where you have offer, offer, offer. And then it's just, it's done different ways in different methods, but essentially you're getting to a point where you have, okay, this is the final group of people who are interested, and here's the terms that they're offering. And then at that point, as Carla was saying earlier, you want, we always set up sort of a connection whereby the author will talk on the phone with the different interested parties, and that is probably, I mean, certainly the terms are important, but there have been cases where the author chose to go with a publisher who had offered less of an advance or less books in the auction, because again, what you're looking for is a partner, not just like, how can I get the most money for this book? Like, I don't, maybe there's authors who, but I don't work with them. And most of us don't. Like, you want, as an author, I have a story to tell. I want to, who's going to be the best partner, A, to shape this story, B, to get it to readers, and just to do that in the most, true and real and the best way possible all around. So again, making that editorial connection, again, you have the terms on the table, but what's really going to make that final decision is the connection that you have as an author with the different offering parties.
Well, and in terms of just to add to that, the publishers will all say, these are my offers, and there are different kinds of auctions. One might be, this is it, this is the max, and then that's it. Or it could be, okay, everybody sort of said this is what they're doing, then we go back to the publishers and say, are you interested in staying here? Are you going to offer something else? Right? And so you little by little whittle it down to the final, and then they arm wrestle, and then the person who wins the arm wrestle is the winner. I'm just kidding.
The children's writers are curious about whether it's okay to bring your own illustrator, or if that's a problem and you should just leave it up to the publisher.
I would advise against it unless you are a one-person author illustrator show, or unless there's a very exceptional example. But typically that's, you are the creator of the text. You should sell that, because it can backfire, because sometimes sometimes the illustrator and author may be on different levels of skill. Sometimes it may be a different artistic vision, where if you submit that to a publisher or to an agent, they might say, well, this is great, but I don't love the art. And then you're like, okay, well, what does that leave me as an author? Or I would have envisioned it with this depiction. It's also because it's not typically done. Usually you lead with a text. If you're a creator only, it also speaks to a certain level of inexperience in the industry if you come with previous illustrations. So I would say, unless there's some exceptional reason, that you should just, you're an author, you're finding an agent for your work, and then that is taken care of almost always by the illustrator, by the editor.
What about the length of the book? Some people were wondering if this book isn't a little longer than a lot of middle grade. if the dark elements to it are ever a concern. Did you have thoughts about marketing it as middle grade versus YA or anything like that?
And this always read very clearly as middle grade to me. I would say that in general, I'm resistant to hard and fast rules on page count or like what's allowed. Dark is tricky because I think really dark themes can put off some readers. Like not everybody wants to read, like especially I think in this last, these last few years, I think so many of us are seeking more escapist reads. Or books that sort of take us away from the trauma in our lives. But yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know. I mean, I think kids of all ages deal with difficult situations of all sorts. And in general, I lean towards thinking a kid can handle it if it's handled well by the author, if it's done well. I don't know. Joan, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I mean, as far as categorization, I would, you know, as an author creating, you know, is it middle grade, is it YA? I would follow the age of the protagonist. That's typically the sort of rule of thumb. If you're in that, you know, 8 to 12-ish age, you're probably middle grade in a middle grade novel. If you're 15 and over, you're probably in a YA novel. If you're 13 or 14, my sympathies. It's just a hard category for shelving reasons and, you know, bookstore reasons. But yes, and as far as length, I don't think I don't see or saw Lotería as being especially long. I think it's pretty standard. You know, I think it's not a shorter book, but I don't think it's long in any sense. I think it tells the story that it needs to tell, and I think that's, you know, as Catherine said, like yes, there's rules that you need to follow. Like, for example, having the adult protagonist, that is actually unusual and can be a resistant thing in middle grade, particularly where, you know, do you have adult characters in point of view? It's actually very, very rare, but it works. So, you know, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you go out seeking that in your novel unless it must be there, because it can make it harder to sell. But when it works, like, you know, you can't imagine this book without that. It just would not be the same book. It would not be what it needs to be. So
Catherine, can you define what you think of as the commercial hook that you mentioned?
Yeah, that's a little tricky, but I guess I just think of it as something that is in the zeitgeist that there's a demonstrated audience for, maybe. I think with Lotería, it's a pacey adventure that connects to a very popular card game that there haven't been a million books about. I think to me that feels commercial, and like on our internal documents, I think we described it as like Coco meets the Phantom Toll Booth. Like it was very easy to find those sorts of fun comps. Not that we would use those as literal sales comps, because one of them is a movie and one of them is 50 years old. But when you can crystallize the idea into a very brief elevator pitch easily, that is a good indicator that it's got that commercial hook. But yeah, I don't know. Like it's one of those sort of horrible terms we use all the time that has a slightly squishy definition.
I like to imagine it as kind of like a movie poster where they have a little tagline that, you know, or hook, maybe even more than commercial, but like, you know, when people are like, what is hook? And I'm like, well, if you can see a little tagline, you know, there's something in the water, or, you know, like it's that, you know, when you can easily elevator pitch it, then, you know, or something that, again, that kind of grabs hold of your imagination in a really exciting way.
Someone asked, a few people asked about the sales team. That's something we don't talk about very often. Does sales take their cues from the size of the advance or anything else in particular? And what's the editor's role in shepherding the book at that point?
So a pivotal moment in the sort of development of a book is when we launch it internally, which is usually about, like, I don't know, a year or so before, maybe a year and a half, a year before the book goes on sale. So up to that point, marketing, publicity, sales have had minimal involvement. And size of the advance is part of it. Like if you paid $1 million for something, sales has to get behind it, even if they don't want to. But that's honestly not really the kind of situation you want to be in, where people are dragged kicking and screaming into something. For this book, had a very happy journey. I think we were already in a good spot because it had sold at auction. There was demonstrated interest. We were really excited about it in editorial. Momentum had built through the design process. The art was coming in so good. I think a book develops too, like after acquisition. Like the story just got better and better, and the art just enhanced it. And by the time we were sharing it with the sales team, I think there was just really a lot for them to dig into. And this was actually chosen by our field sales reps as their favorite book of the season. So we have something called the rep pick, and they all vote. We have these, it's mainly the indie booksellers. So people who sell to your favorite local bookstore, Barnes and Noble and Costco have their whole own thing. That's a little more programmatic. But the field salespeople they're wonderful. They're really hands-on. Not every company has them, actually. I'll shout out to PRH for one of the few companies that still has sales reps all across the country. They loved it, and they voted, and it was chosen. And so that really helped, just knowing that we have this team of advocates, and they're really, for every indie bookstore they're selling to, they're calling this out as like, this is the one we really think you should pay attention to. So I'm sure that played a huge, none of this is measurable, but it's all good.
We got a number of pandemic related questions. Is the timeline different still in publishing?
Yes.
The supply chain issues. Is there anything that authors should know right now if they're about to query or submit, I suppose?
Yeah, the main impact on the timeline is that we just have to release everything to production earlier. Like we are trying to build in the expectation of shipping delays into our schedule. So everything is just due earlier. So a book that I'm signing up right now, I would be inclined to schedule it further out than I might have in the past, just so it really has adequate time for development. I'm not sure if the question was really about that. Like, do you think the question was maybe more about like timeline for hearing back, or?
All of it. Yeah, we received questions about each.
To be honest, yeah, people are pretty overloaded. It's been, all of our processes have had to change and adapt. And I think we're settling into more of an equilibrium now that we know how to work remotely. But a lot had to be built kind of from the ground up. So it did slow everything down.
Is the release date itself that big a deal? And what should an author do, say, in the 3 months leading up to the release date?
Well, I'm not a publicist, so I can't, 100% speak to that. I don't know. What do you think, Joe? I feel like release dates are sort of important, but I don't think they're really make or break. Like, for instance, if you put a book out in the fall, you can expect that there will be a ton of other huge releases coming out. So sometimes if it's a debut novel, you're better served putting it out in the summer or a quieter season where it will be the big fish in the slightly smaller pond.
Yeah, I guess I would sort of come at it from the angle of it's typically not in your control as an author, so I wouldn't worry about it because it's not, there's never a point where the editor is going to be like, hey, what do you think of your release date? Usually, it could happen. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but I think those are the factors that you're thinking about and deliberating as you make the pub dates. And sometimes, your book will be a fall book or a winter book, or but I think there's probably, like, as you were saying, like pros and cons for different times of year versus others. Is and I think that is a decision that is made very thoughtfully in-house. And sometimes there's a case where an author will be like, I have literally 2 books coming out on the same day, which has happened to me as an author. So that, in cases like that, it's like, can we do something and move the pub dates? But other than that, I feel like it's, typically something that you're just like, okay, cool. This is my day. Exciting. Circle it in red. Sparkles.
Yeah.
A number of people ask questions about being mid-career. Maybe they've already published a few books, but maybe they lost their agent retired, etc., and they want to get back in the game. Do you have any advice for that situation? Anyone?
I mean, I would say that the rules are the same as they are when you first have a book, right? And you build your network, you connect, you go to the conferences, you keep writing, you keep improving your craft, you keep writing, you keep improving your craft, you keep writing. Having a solid body of work. And I think especially, I have really valued that with Joan, because I have a whole bunch of stories that range from picture books to chapter books to novels. And so having a lot of work that I can bring to her and say, I'm not just this one book deal, right? There's more that we can work with. That probably makes you a more compelling partner in a longer term relationship. So that would be my advice as the author, right? Is to just keep writing. But I'll put it up to Joan and Catherine on the other.
That's literally my advice too. That's what I was going to say. So just keep developing your craft, and it's just that persistence and the process.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, there is some like negative talk out there about like your publisher is looking at your sales track, right? So if the first few books didn't sell, that's something they have to consider. But I think there are always stories where that turns around. And like, for instance, Lisa Abrams was just giving a talk at Random House the other day about a middle grade fantasy series she worked on that kind of tanked in the first 2 books, and the sales didn't start picking up until the 3rd book. And it was word of mouth, right? It was the existing, there were several books out there available to read, and the readers sort of gained enthusiasm, and it just, for all that there are patterns that the publishing world is like trained to look for, there are definitely exceptions to those patterns. And I think the best thing you can do for yourself as an author is to find the partners who really believe in your work. Like if you have an agent who really gets what you're trying to do and will stand by your side, that's amazing. Or an editor who's, really in it for the long haul, that I think can be powerful.
And critique partners, amazing critique partners.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. How did you find critique partners, Carla? Do you have advice for that?
Yeah. So in my case, it started with 12 by 12 challenge, which is a picture book community. And that is literally where I met my favorite critique partners. And at the time I was in 3 different groups, and then I just sort of gravitated towards one. And in that group, we also have novelists. And so it was just a very happy combination where we can critique each other's novels or picture books. But what I like about that is that it's a group of writers that take their craft seriously, and we take each other seriously. And so we're not just saying, oh, this is a wonderful book. We're actually really digging in and spending time and going line by line and giving that feedback that helps us become better writers. We're also supporting each other and saying, hey, stick in the game. You've got it, right? And intel and networking and communicating, and the critique partner, I think relationship is really essential to the author's growth, because that's your peer group, that's your mentorship, those are your coaches, those are your allies. So that's my little plug for critique partners.
Yes, and it costs a lot less than an MFA.
For sure. Yes.
Well, it's about 15 past, so I think we'll call it there. But this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. It's a wonderful story.
Well, thank you for hosting us, and thank you everybody who stuck around until the end. Hopefully this was helpful, and just a pleasure to be here. I always love hanging out with Joan and Catherine, so thank you for joining me today.
Awesome. So great to be here with you all.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a good night.
Bye.